answer to this.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so what the federal government, when it puts together a budget, the amount that it says it's going to spend is what it expects to spend. I mean, if there's more unemployment and they have to pay more dole payments, their spending can go up. Yep. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because they plan to spend a certain amount, that will be the amount that they spend.
Can I?
Yeah, and as far as, well, yeah, I'll go on, Steve. I was just going to say, can I just say something else and then?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, but because Steve mentioned something about this job guarantee, and this job guarantee idea is that anyone who wants a job, who can't get a job in the private sector or in the conventional public sector, gets this job guarantee job that's made available by the federal government, because it's got as much money as it likes to purchase that labour and pay that labour, a minimum but livable wage. Now, the difference between this approach with the job guarantee and the old traditional 1950s, 60s pump priming, Keynesian pump priming, was that with Keynesian pump priming, the government had to sort of estimate how much it thought it had to spend to get total spending up to the potential output level. It could have been a bit less and it could have been a bit more, but with the job guarantee, it doesn't have to worry. Because if it's a little bit less, the total spending is a little bit less than potential output, then you'll have unemployment, and then when people...
Sorry, she had a question about what you just said.
It wasn't illustrating that work for the dole.
Would you like?
Well, hang on. For the dole, you get, how much do you get paid for the dole? You get about $40,000 a year.
One difference is that it's optional.
Yeah, it's optional. You don't have to do it.
So you're not talking about taking somebody's alternative income support away, although you could do, but it's not part of it. Another difference is that the level of pay would be higher. Another difference is that you get the same, well, we have this superannuation system, you get the same superannuation benefits and working conditions that anybody else would get. The idea is it's funded centrally, but it's administered locally. There's been a lot of research done on it. It's not just some idea coming out of nowhere. The other thing I wanted to say is that when you're setting macroeconomic policy, you need to be looking 2 or 3 years ahead. So nobody's talking about fine-tuning government spending from one year to the next. At the moment, it is true that when the interest rate tool isn't going to work anymore. At least it's not going to work to stimulate spending because it can't go below zero. So we've basically used that up now. It's gone, that approach to running policy. But interest rate decisions have always been taken with a medium-term view for demand in the economy, looking 2 or 3 years ahead. And there's anything that monetary policy can do in that context, fiscal policy can do as well. You can have, you were studying, I know you've been studying first year macroeconomics, you will have learned something called the Taylor rule, which is how you're supposed to set interest rates depending on the current level of inflation and what inflation is expected to be relative to some target. There's no particular reason why you couldn't have a so-called Taylor rule for the rate of growth of pure government spending, where pure government spending on infrastructure projects, that kind of thing, over the next 2 or 3 years could be projected to rise faster, when inflation was forecast to be towards the low end of your target range, and was slowed down when rising inflation was seen to be a problem. Monetary policy, they can change interest rates overnight, but interest rate decisions take a very long time to have their effect on the economy, and the idea that there is a bigger lag with fiscal policy than with monetary policy is not necessarily true. Anyway, sorry.
I'm just conscious of the time. Could we have just maybe 3 more questions? I saw someone put their hand up here who hasn't spoken. I'll come back to you if that's all right. We've got... Yep, go ahead.
A big thing that's happened in recent decades is globalisation. And that gives the feeling there's a world economy. And then the default currency for a world economy is US dollars. So you get countries like Argentina borrowing hugely in US dollars, and then the sovereign country can go broke. So do we need to address the argument in terms of that perception of a global economy?
Argentina went broke because it foolishly chose to lock its currency in something called I've forgotten the name, a currency board system with the US dollar. So basically they decided at the end of the 1990s that 1 peso was going to equal 1 US dollar forever. When you do that, you are basically making the same decision Greece made. From then on, you can only borrow in foreign currency.
That's right.
So what I am saying is don't ever do that.
But it's happening, particularly from
Not
private
here.
companies.
Well, it's happening, and as far as people like Bill Mitchell recently gave a talk at the European Commission, and I don't think they would have liked some of what he had to say, because what he'd basically say is demolish the Eurozone. You're not ever going to have a meaningful, powerful central government that can redistribute resources the way the Australian government can between states. The Eurozone doesn't work like that, and it's not going to work like that, so it's never going to work properly.
So if some countries are moving away from sovereign currencies, we need to have some direction for them.
Well, we can't. All I'm saying, I'm not trying to tell the Argentinian government what to do. I spend enough time worrying about what the Australian.
Was there someone else?
I just had a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, on what you've said, can a case be mounted in Parliament that the hockey budget has misled Parliament? I'm being a bit surprised at this sort of issue.
Only in the sense that every budget in Australia since Paul Keating, at least, has misled Parliament.
Including Paul Keating.
Yeah, including Paul Keating.
Yeah, we've got one over here.
Where do you see the employment opportunities for Australia moving forwards?
What areas? Or?
Yeah, do you mean in what areas?
Yeah, I mean, obviously manufacturing is going backwards. Where's the way forwards?
That's a difficult question for me to answer at this time of the evening. It's not something that I would claim to have expertise over. If we are going to have a successful economy in the future, we're certainly not going to achieve a successful economy without having decent physical, technological infrastructure, a well-trained and educated labour force. But we are not promoting, or at least that's not the purpose of what I've just been talking about, to promote a massive increase in government intervention, picking winners in the economy. All we are saying really is that you don't have to worry about government budget deficits. The government can't run out of money. If the government does have a set of industrial policies which it wants to pursue, then they may or may not be a good idea, but a shortage of money is not one of the issues. And the idea behind the employment guarantee is that the economy is a very complex system, unpredictable, uncertain, beyond our ability to control. So the employment guarantee scheme is really, the idea is to have a buffer stock of employed people rather than a buffer stock of unemployed people like we have at the moment. Nobody should be forced to be unemployed involuntarily or underemployed involuntarily. People can choose poverty, but nobody should have poverty forced upon them.
Sorry, just one more question over here.
If the government goes down this path, how do they know how much of a deficit to run each year?
Well, you'd be what they plan to do at the moment is not what they actually do anyway. So the government can forecast the budget position that it expects to arise, but like I was just saying, the economy is a very uncertain thing. We can't fine-tune the economy, and what actually happens may not be what they anticipate happening. If there's more people in the employment guarantee scheme and less tax being paid than had been anticipated, then the budget deficit will be bigger than forecast. If that happens, it's in no sense a failure. However, it's just something that's happened. It's not something to panic about.
In fact, the government really shouldn't think about the budget position at all. It's irrelevant. The government should be thinking about what it should be providing and acquiring the resources, therefore spending to provide it. The budget position then depends upon how much it ends up taxing the private sector, and that depends a lot upon the savings desires of the private sector. So it's not a case of, should we be aiming for a certain budget deficit? It should be thinking, well, we need to have these universities, these schools, these hospitals and so on. How much it ends up spending may have a lot to do with the level of private sector spending, because if there's insufficient private sector spending and you have people spilling out of private sector labour markets as unemployed with a job guarantee system. They get employed by the federal government, and federal government spending goes up, and that might increase the size of the deficit, but so what? That's what's required to achieve full employment. But the size of the deficit is irrelevant. So it should be aiming about in terms of what it wants, what it should provide, what the people want.
The full employment's the target, really.
Full employment is one of the targets. You can achieve full employment in many ways, but you can have full employment by having people painting rocks, but that's not pretty effective. You really want if you are taking on more people because people are spilling out of private sector labour markets because of declining private sector spending, you want those people to be doing useful, productive things. And there's a list you could write a list as long as your arm of the sorts of... In fact, the Centre of Full Employment and Equity, that's Coffee, where Professor Bill Mitchell works at, he's been advocating this job guarantee system. And of course, one of the questions he's been getting for a long period of time is, what are these people going to do? So what Bill did was he sent out questionnaires to some of the local councils in the Hunter region around Newcastle. And they got lists as long as you can imagine of all the things that councils could do if the resources were available. So there's plenty of projects that can be undertaken, useful projects. Okay, now the amount of projects that are undertaken will depend on how much private sector spending there is, because if there's more private sector spending, then there's more people employed in the private sector, so there's less available in the public sector. But you'll always have so much in the public sector because the public sector will be providing certain types of things, but there will be additional things if there is lower private sector spending. So the amount of people employed by the public sector, you have the conventional public sector, then you have the job guarantee workers. So the amount that's employed in the public sector is going to go up and down as the employment in the private sector goes down and up.
Thank you.
That's it.
Could you please join me in thanking Associate Professor Phil Lorne and Stephen Hale for that.